So think about the last time you cut open a melon.
Oh, yeah, like a cantaloupe or a honeydew.
Right, exactly. You probably just took a spoon, scraped out that whole wet, tangled mass of seeds right in the center.
Just
And
dumped it straight into the trash.
yeah, or I mean the compost bin if you're, feeling particularly responsible that day. But you did it without a second thought, right? You were just completely focused on the fruit itself.
Of course, that's the part we actually want.
Right, but today we are looking at a text that basically argues you didn't just throw away food waste,
Mm.
you actually threw away a miniature, like perfectly ordered forest and potentially a really profound source of psychological peace.
I mean, it is such a brilliant study in, well, resource alchemy, really.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Because the text we're analyzing today essentially takes this item that our entire society universally categorizes as just garbage, right?
Hmm.
And it demonstrates how to process that garbage into high-value psychological capital. And it does this just by shifting the lens through which we view our immediate environment.
Totally. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a highly specific, very reflective journal entry. It's titled Notes on Gardening, Part 973.
Which is quite the series, honestly.
Right, and this was published on August 1st, 2026 by a writer named Ang. So, okay, let's unpack this, because this isn't some, dense academic paper on botany.
No, definitely not.
And we aren't looking at some grand, life-altering epiphany that someone had on a month-long silent retreat in the mountains. We're literally examining a micro-lesson. It's this very quiet, meticulous documentation of growing a simple honey melon.
Biologically known as cucumis-melo for the plant nerds out there.
Exactly, growing a cucumis-melo from seed. And our mission today is to explore how this incredibly mundane act actually uncovers some very sharp insights. Stuff about cognitive bias, the democratization of our hobbies, and these biological ticking clocks we sort of initiate when we finally step out of our comfort zones.
You know, that detail you mentioned about this being part 973
Yeah.
really sets the stakes perfectly for this.
It really does. It's a huge number.
Right, because we are reading the internal thoughts of someone who has clearly spent an immense amount of time observing the very subtle mechanics of plant growth.
Thousands of hours, probably.
Exactly.
Lit.
So when an observer with that much specialized, granular experience points their attention at something as commonplace as a grocery store melon.
They're going to see things we totally miss.
Exactly. The resulting analysis just bypasses all the obvious stuff and digs straight into the underlying systems of, like, why we actually find certain things satisfying in life.
Well, let's start right there, actually, with the satisfaction part, because that really is the emotional anchor of Eng's entry here. The post highlights what they call a self-proclaimed soft spot for seed germination.
Which is such a specific thing to have a soft spot for.
Right, but it isn't just a generic, like, oh, I love nature kind of vibe. Eng includes all these photos and points very specifically to the visual of uniform growth.
The uniformity is key here.
Yeah, it's the experience of watching all these individual melon seeds sprout at the exact same time, right? At the exact same height, in this highly, highly uniform way. Ang derives this immense, almost disproportionate sense of peace from this one specific visual.
And you know, what's fascinating here is the psychology behind that reaction. It is really worth dissecting.
Oh, for sure.
Because if you consider the baseline state of daily human existence, right?
Yeah.
We are just constantly navigating high entropy environments.
High entropy, yeah, just chaos, basically.
Exactly. The weather changes unpredictably. Traffic patterns fluctuate for no reason. Complex interpersonal dynamics at your job just shift without warning.
You never know what mood your boss is going to be in.
Right. So we spend the vast majority of our cognitive energy every single day just reacting to variables that we literally cannot control.
We are constantly just playing defense against chaos. And I was thinking about this uniform growth visual, and it kind of taps into the exact same mechanism as, like, perfectly organizing a really chaotic workspace.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Like, you have this desk with scattered papers, coffee rings everywhere, loose wires just tangled up, and then you spend an hour aligning everything. You make neat little stacks, you wipe down the clear surfaces, and that relief you feel...
It's palpable.
Yeah, it isn't just about having a clean desk. It is the sudden physical manifestation of order. It's like watching the puzzle pieces finally just click together perfectly.
I'd actually take that analogy a step further, too.
Okay, how so?
Well, when you organize a desk, you are imposing that order through manual force.
Yeah.
Right? You are doing the work.
Right. I'm the one stacking the papers.
But the profound appeal of the seedling tray is that the order is biological and autonomous. You establish the parameters, the soil, the moisture, the temperature, and then you just step back.
Oh, wow. Yeah. The plant does the work.
Exactly. The biology executes its programming flawlessly all on its own.
Yeah.
It is nature providing a controlled variable for once.
That's so true.
Watching 20 seeds just push through the soil simultaneously, it offers this rare, very tangible proof that cause and effect still function reliably in a world that usually feels, frankly, entirely random.
It's basically outsourcing the organization to the plant's DNA.
Yes, perfectly said.
But, if this psychological reward, this autonomous living order is so potent, I think we have to look at the economics of accessing it.
The economics here are fascinating.
Because modern consumer culture really conditions us to believe that specialized peace of mind requires specialized equipment.
It always costs money.
Always. If you want to find, a flow state in cycling, you're told you need to buy a $2,000 bike. If you want the piece of woodworking, you need a garage full of really expensive tools.
Right. The barrier to entry for most hobbies is practically engineered to be a financial hurdle.
Seriously, it's exhausting.
We are constantly sold the gear before we are ever actually taught the practice of the hobby itself.
Exactly. But Aang completely bypasses that whole consumer trap here. The text is very, very explicit about the economic metric of this little project.
Yes, the cost breakdown is amazing.
This entire experience, this profound sense of uniform satisfaction, it was funded by a mere, quote, half slice of honey melon. Literally. The cost is virtually zero.
Which really brings us back to that concept of resource alchemy I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
By removing the financial barrier completely, Aang democratizes the hobby. But I think the mechanism of joy here is actually a bit more complex than just being cheap.
Really? How so?
Well, the satisfaction isn't derived merely from being frugal or saving a few bucks. The thrill is deeply rooted in the transformation of utility itself.
Okay, break that down for me.
You're taking the seeds from a half slice of melon, which is an item that literally has negative utility in our kitchens, right? It's something you actively have to clean up and throw away.
Yeah, it's a chore. It's a mess on the cutting board.
Exactly. And Aang is taking that negative utility item and installing it as the centerpiece of this incredibly rewarding daily practice.
I do wonder, though, if the lack of financial investment actually, increases the psychological reward.
Oh, I'm sure it does.
Because think about it. When you buy that $2,000 bike, you feel this massive obligation to enjoy it.
The sunk cost fallacy.
Exactly. There's this sunk cost just hanging over the entire experience. You're like, I better love this bike or I wasted a paycheck. But with the melon seeds, there is absolutely zero expectation.
You're just playing with house money.
Yeah, you're playing with house money. If it fails, whatever, it's just compost. But if it succeeds, you've essentially hacked the system to generate pure joy out of actual garbage.
And that lack of pressure absolutely creates a much cleaner psychological environment for observation.
Because you aren't stressed about it.
Right. Without the anxiety of needing a return on investment, Aang is totally free to simply watch the biological process unfold. It just strips away the performative aspect of having a hobby and leaves only the intrinsic value of the experience itself.
Which makes the next revelation in this journal entry just incredibly frustrating to read, honestly.
It really is a bit of a facepalm moment.
Because if this experience is virtually free, right, and it carries no performance anxiety and it yields this immense psychological peace, why in the world did it take Aang 973 posts to finally try it?
It is arguably the most revealing confession in the entire text.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it when I read that part.
Aang essentially admits to postponing the exploration of this species of melon seeds entirely for, quote, all these moons.
All these moons.
Right, and the stated reason for waiting that long is remarkably simple. Aang says they are, quote, rather fond of flowering plants.
It's an identity trap. Aang built this rigid mental fence. I am a flowering plant enthusiast, that's who I am. And anything that didn't produce a flower in that preferred aesthetic was just automatically filtered out of their reality.
It's so common, though. We constantly use these categorical biases as a form of cognitive load reduction.
Cognitive load reduction meaning just making life easier to process.
Exactly. The world is just far too complex to evaluate every single option presented to us on a daily basis. So we create these shorthand identities to cope.
Like saying, I only read nonfiction.
Right, or I only listen to acoustic music, or in this case, I only grow flowering plants.
Yeah.
It definitely makes decision-making much more efficient, but the hidden cost of doing that is massive.
It reminds me of people who refuse to engage with like a critically acclaimed piece of media just because it sits slightly outside their preferred genre.
Oh, absolutely.
You could have this masterful, incredible jazz album sitting right in front of you, completely free to stream on your phone, but because you consider yourself strictly a hip-hop fan, you literally walk right past it for years.
You're just blindly ignoring it.
Yeah, you essentially weaponize your own preferences against your potential enjoyment.
And the mechanics of that bias are fascinating because they are entirely self-imposed.
Nobody was forcing Aang to do this.
Exactly. No one ever told Aang that a gardener cannot appreciate both flowering plants and fruiting vines. That limitation was purely internally constructed, and it was rigorously maintained for 972 posts.
That's a lot of posts to ignore, Melon.
But breaking that mold, just taking the tiny incremental risk of planting a grocery store melon seed, it completely shattered that artificial boundary.
It really did.
And I think it forces all of us to examine our own rigid preferences. Like, what easily accessible, virtually free sources of joy are we currently completely blind to, simply because they don't match the aesthetic of the identity we've constructed for ourselves?
It's such a subtle but vital mental model shift. But, the moment Aang breaks that bias and actually plants the seed, a completely new problem emerges.
Right, the reality check.
Because unfamiliarity with a new domain means you don't always know the rules of engagement. Since Aang is a flowering plant expert, they might not be fully prepared for the aggressive biology of a fruiting vine like a melon.
Melons grow fast.
Super fast. The honeymoon phase of seed germination is notoriously short, and the text very quickly transitions from this passive observation into a strict biological ticking clock.
And this is where the reality of caretaking really asserts itself. Because the uniform growth that provided so much peace initially, it is not a static state.
No, it's alive.
It is a rapid biological process and it requires timely intervention.
Yeah, the text notes that these sprouted seedlings must be transplanted to these unused seedling trays out on the backyard balcony.
They need a new environment.
Right. And if they aren't moved, if the gardener just sits there passively enjoying the visual of all these perfect little sprouts, the plants will suffer from something called etiolation.
Etiolation, yes, that is a critical concept here, both biologically and, I'd say, metaphorically.
I'd never actually heard the term before this text.
The text defines it specifically as the development of elongated stems, leading to leggy, weak growth.
Well, let's look at the mechanics of that, because the visual is actually quite tragic.
It really is.
The plant basically isn't getting the light it needs inside, so it just stretches blindly. Is the plant actually actively cannibalizing its own structural integrity just to reach taller?
Precisely.
Yeah.
That is exactly what happens. In the absence of adequate light, a seedling will redirect all of the finite energy it has stored within its endosperm.
Just burning through its reserves.
Yes. So instead of using that energy to develop robust leaves for photosynthesis or building strong, thick cellulose walls for stability, it pours everything it has into rapid cellular elongation.
Wow. Okay, so they just stretch out.
The cells literally stretch, thinning out their own walls, completely sacrificing foundational strength just for reach.
That sounds like a terrible strategy.
It is a desperate biological gamble. The plant is trying to stretch fast enough to find the sun before the energy reserves run out.
Yeah.
And if it fails, it will literally collapse under its own unsupported weight.
Wow. That completely changes the way I look at human burnout.
Oh, how so?
Well, think about it. When we take on a new project or we step out of our comfort zone, we often just chase the initial milestone.
Invisible growth.
Exactly, the visible growth. But we do it without building the infrastructure to support it. We sacrifice sleep, we abandon our healthy routines, we just pour all our energy into reaching that one external goal.
We stretch ourselves.
Yes. We become structurally weak. We stretch our resources so thin that even if we eventually reach the goal, we don't have the foundation to sustain it once we're there. We basically become leggy and weak, just like the neglected seedling.
The causal link there is undeniable. And, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really highlights the duality of the gardening experience.
The passive versus active parts.
Exactly. The initial satisfaction of starting a project, enjoying the uniform sprout, is entirely passive. But sustaining that project requires active environmental management.
You actually have to do the work.
The seeds executed their biological programming perfectly. They did their part. Now the burden of action shifts entirely to the gardener. The exact environment that was absolutely perfect for germination is suddenly lethal for maturation.
The context has to change. Moving them out to the backyard balcony isn't just like a chore on a to-do list. It is an absolute biological necessity to prevent them from stretching themselves to death.
And because this is a totally new venture for Ang, stepping outside that flowering plant comfort zone we talked about, this intervention probably feels way more urgent or unfamiliar.
It's stressful.
It illustrates that when we adopt new perspectives or break our biases, we inherently invite new responsibilities. Growth, whether it is botanical or personal, is never a completely passive experience once that initial catalyst is sparked.
Which really brings us to the aftermath of this entire cycle. Resolving the crisis of etiolation, getting those trays out to the balcony, and successfully navigating this tiny agricultural experiment, it leads to a massive structural shift in how Ang views the world.
The total paradigm shift.
Right. And the post doesn't end with some grand philosophical declaration about, saving the earth or anything. It ends with a highly practical reprioritization of a daily environment.
Yes, the grocery store.
Ang is literally looking at these melon seedlings and begins wondering what other plant species can be found and explored on their next grocery run.
It is a complete recategorization of raw materials.
Because usually the grocery store is just a chore.
Historically, yes. The grocery store is just a landscape of chores. It is simply a place you go to exchange money for caloric fuel and household necessities.
Right. You navigate the aisles, you check the items off the list, and you leave as fast as you can. It is entirely utilitarian.
Completely.
But by successfully germinating that single half slice of melon, the architecture of the grocery store is fundamentally altered in Ang's mind. It's not that Ang is suddenly, skipping through the produce aisle like a Disney character having some magical awakening.
No, it's much more practical than that.
It is a calculated realization that the store is functioning as an open-source hardware store for biology.
That is the exact mechanism of the shift. Think about it. A tomato is no longer just a component of a salad you're making for dinner.
Right, it's a seed pod.
It is a seed pod containing 50 individual potential plants.
Right.
A bell pepper is suddenly a low-cost botanical experiment just waiting to be activated. The produce section literally transforms into a laboratory and a seed bank.
It effectively gamifies the errand.
Yes, exactly.
It turns a completely mundane chore into a scavenger hunt for hidden psychological capital. And the beauty of this shift is that it requires absolutely zero travel, zero expensive wellness retreats, and very, very little money.
Ouch there.
The grand paradigm shift didn't require climbing a mountaintop. It just required paying close attention to the structural potential of the things we already interact with every single day.
And this circles back perfectly to the cost of that initial identity trap we discussed.
Oh, the flowering plant bias?
Right. By finally shedding the restrictive label of flowering plant enthusiast, the entire spectrum of fruiting and seeding plants at the local market suddenly becomes available inventory for Ang's curiosity.
It just unlocks the whole store.
It demonstrates perfectly how letting go of even a minor aesthetic bias can exponentially multiply your access to everyday discovery.
So, if we trace the through line of this entire deep dive today, we started with an item destined for the compost bin, the messy seeds of a cucumis-melo.
Just garbage.
Right. And we examined the profound, almost puzzle-solving relief that comes from witnessing autonomous biological order in a chaotic world.
We analyze the economics of that joy, noting how removing the heavy financial pressure of consumer hobbies creates this pure, unburdened environment for observation, literally turning waste into psychological reward.
We confronted the identity traps that keep us from accessing that joy. How labeling ourselves strictly as one type of person just blinds us to the resources sitting right in front of us.
And we broke down the mechanics of the ticking clock, recognizing that new growth demands a new environment.
Right, the etiolation.
Exactly. And failing to provide that environment results in a structural collapse.
Ultimately culminating in the recategorization of the mundane, transforming the boring chore of a grocery run into this active exploration of biological potential.
It is an incredibly dense micro lesson, and it's all packed into just one journal entry.
It really is. Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over today. We want you to take the mechanics of Ang's journey and map them onto your own physical space.
Try it out for yourself.
Later today, when you are preparing a meal in your kitchen, just look closely at the cutting board. Look at the seeds, the stems, the cast-offs you are casually scraping into the trash.
The things you usually ignore.
Based on everything we've unpacked regarding resource alchemy and our own blind spots, consider what other hidden potential for quiet, uniform satisfaction you are routinely throwing away.
What unseen miniature backyard forests are sitting on your kitchen counter right now?
Exactly. Completely obscured by your own biases about what is and isn't valuable.
It really challenges the assumption. The discovery requires distance.
It really does.
The materials for your next great fascination are likely already on your grocery list.
You just have to stop looking at them as food and start looking at them as blueprints. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.